Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining our coffee hour today. Hope everyone's doing well. We have some great guest speakers today. Kyle Shiel from the Capital Region Council of Governments and Christine O'Neill from the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. Before they kick things off with our presentation, Jim, our communications manager at Sustainable CT, has a quick announcement. So Jim, hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kate. Just to mention, wanted to be sure everybody's aware that the campaign for a sustainable CT, our first ever direct fundraising campaign to Connecticut residents, is going on now. Through December 31st, we're inviting everyone to join in this opportunity to amplify their support for sustainability efforts across the state. The Hampshire Foundation has generously offered to match every contribution dollar for dollar, which is huge, and it doubles the impact of each gift. So if you've already given, thank you so much. If you haven't, think about it. Pass the idea on to friends and family. We're really looking to try to increase our reach here with this. We're aiming to connect directly with Connecticut residents, inviting them to play a really vital role in supporting programs that empower towns and your town and all the cities in Connecticut to enhance environmental health, economic strength, and quality of life. So you can make a tax-deductible contribution online through the Support Us tab on any page of the Sustainable CT website. So please take a look. I really appreciate that, and enjoy the coffee hour. Thanks. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Jim. All right, so we have a great conversation this morning about action planning that's been happening throughout the state. And I will let our experts, Christine and Kyle, take over from here.
Great. Thanks, Kate and Jim. Morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Shiel. I'm a principal planner with the Capital Region Council of Governments, and I am the project manager for the Hartford area Regional Climate Action Plan. I'm joined by Christine O'Neill from the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. I'll let her introduce herself during the latter half of the presentation when she'll be covering the CCAP. But we're here to talk about the regional climate action planning efforts that the COGs across the Connecticut have been doing over the past year and a half. And it's been a really collaborative process. We've really gotten to know each other at the COGs very well. And it's been a really rewarding and engaging process. So we hope you find this interesting and illuminating. And I've given a variation of this talk multiple times, so there's a chance I'll gloss over stuff. So if you have questions, feel free to interject, ask them in the chat, and Kate will kind of prod me here and there. If there's questions you might have, there's a chance I might gloss over some stuff. So again, feel free to interject, and I'm happy to kind of stop along the way to answer questions. So we'll cover where the planning areas are, the CPRG process in particular, and in general, the greenhouse gas inventory process that we conducted across all three MSAs, some of the outreach and engagement work we've done, and the next steps going forward. So the Regional Climate Action Plan is funded through a new program called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, so CPRG. So if you hear that acronym, that's what it stands for, the CPRG program. It was newly created under the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, and it's really intended for a couple things. To encourage intergovernmental collaboration, to create pathways to reduce emissions, create flexible planning and funding resources, and to ultimately kind of drive transformative and scalable decarbonization efforts. And again, I can say that it's really fulfilled that goal number one there. It's really enhanced intergovernmental collaboration across certainly the COGs and within our member municipalities as well. So there's two phases for the CPRG. The first is planning. Within that planning phase, there's three deliverables: the Priority Climate Action Plan, which was completed and submitted to EPA in March of this year. And currently we're on number 2, the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, which Christine will be covering in more detail. Then after the CCAP is done, that's when we do the status reporting to see how we've done on our efforts. And phase 2 is implementation. There was $4.6 billion available nationwide to implement projects that people have called out in their priority climate action plans. Grants could range anywhere from $2 million to $500 million. And the awards were actually announced this past July. They were awarded in October. And Connecticut was actually a recipient of a substantial amount of funding, which I'll talk about a little later, but that is exciting news. So we actually have some money to actually implement some of these projects. So in terms of the timeline, we got the funds in August of 23. We worked on the Priority Climate Action Plan. That was a very, very accelerated process, and we submitted that in March of 2024. And right now, as I said, we're on the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan phase, which involves a little more detail than the Priority Climate Action Plan, has a few more extra elements, which Christine will address during her presentation. Then after the CCAP is done, we go into the status report phase, which comes a little later. So in terms of the planning areas, there's the state plans. Most of the states have their own planning process, but there's also the regional plans or the MSA plans. So within Connecticut, there are three. Let's just say four. So in terms of the Worcester one, that number 4 there, the Worcester area, the northeast part of the state, they opted to partner with the Central Mass Planning Agency up in Massachusetts. So they have their own plan, but they're not really involved in the Connecticut efforts so far. But among the Connecticut efforts, we have the Bridgeport area plan, the New Haven area plan, and the Hartford region plan, which is basically the Cog and River Cog regions, and that's the plan that I'm the project manager for. So again, there's 3 plans. So the Bridgeport area plan, that's a partnership between MetroCog, WestCog, and NVCog. The New Haven plan, which is a partnership between SCROG and NVCog. And again, the Hartford plan is really a collaboration between us at CROG, and RiverCog for the most part. As you can see, Christine over at NVCog has her hands in pretty much every MSA because of their unique geography. They're kind of situated between the 3 different MSAs in the state. And I would say the commonality between all 3 plans is we're working at a regional and local scale, and we're trying to focus on things that can be implemented within local authority. As most of us know, COGs don't really have much in the way of legislative or statutory authority, so we kind of have to work with our member towns to do things that are within their existing purview. So in terms of the process, we start with existing plans, right? There's a lot of great work that's already been done at the state level in Connecticut, certainly at the state level, the Governor's Council on Climate Change. There's regional plans of conservation and development, local plans of conservation and development. So we start there. We're not starting from scratch because we recognize that there's been work done in climate action planning for many years prior to the CPRG process. Then the next phase is we do a greenhouse gas inventory. So like where are the emissions coming from and where do we look to mitigate them? So for us, for the regional plans, UMass Amherst, a bunch of graduate students and PhD students helped us complete our greenhouse gas inventory for these sectors you see listed here. And I would just quickly note that in terms of the nomenclature terminology, mobile emissions really means transportation for the most part. Then if you go from the 4th from the left, the stationary combustion, it's really buildings. That's really the building sector. It's just, again, it's a nomenclature thing that they used for the greenhouse gas inventory. And in terms of the results, you can just look to the pie chart to the right. You can see obviously transportation is by far the biggest single sector. It contributes about 40% of total emissions, quickly followed by stationary, that building sector I mentioned, and the electric grid. And if you look to the right, you can see the proportions are basically the same between all 3 MSAs. Transportation is the biggest in all of them, and then followed by the stationary sector. So in terms of the proportions are basically the same, just the total amount is different due to population and household size. So in terms of engagement, even though we've had a pretty accelerated process through that PCAP phase, that initial PCAP phase, we've really done quite a bit of outreach across all 3 MSAs, local municipal staff, nonprofits, even state agencies. So we've done quite a bit of work across multiple sectors to engage stakeholders on the mitigation efforts they would like to see in their community. And in terms of the measures we selected, there's a bit of a prioritization process. How do we identify measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And there's a couple obvious ones. And number 1 is obviously, does it actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions? 2, is it in the purview of a municipality? Do they have the legal authority to actually do these measures? Or could it be a council of governments, or could it be a partnership between towns, COGs, or third-party nonprofit agencies, for example. 3, does it have demonstrable LIDAC benefits? So LIDAC is an acronym for low-income disadvantaged communities. So what are the impacts on these measures on low-income and disadvantaged communities? Followed by a very important one, is it actually supported by municipal leaders and staff? Do they want to do it? Do they feel it's realistic? Do they feel it's achievable? If it's not, then we're not going to include it in our plans. So it has to be supported by the local leadership for us to include it in the plans. And the last one, is it implementation ready in the short term? Is it something we could realistically do within the next few years? Or is it kind of a moonshot pie in the sky thing? If that's the case, we didn't include measures like that. So those are the kind of the thoughts and the prioritization metrics for the PCAP. And it's really only the start. So Christine will talk about how the CCAP will further refine the items that we included in the priority climate action plan. And again, like I said before, the authority to implement is a key issue here. We're not going to suggest things that the towns can't actually do with their existing power. We might identify some things where they could be able to do or should be able to do, and maybe we suggest some statutory reform. But for the most part, we're looking at measures that the towns can already do within the existing legal framework. And in terms of engagement, like I said, we engaged quite a bit of stakeholders across that accelerated timeline, and we found quite a few common themes for reducing emissions. So I'll quickly touch upon a few. I won't read all of these, but for example, for transportation, we found that converting municipal vehicle fleets to electric vehicles was a commonly cited measure. It's realistic, it's achievable. So that's a place to start, we thought, and eventually the private market will eventually catch on. But we thought as an initial step, municipal and public vehicle fleets is certainly a good candidate to start with. There's also incentivizing the use of transit to encourage mode shift through discounted fares and to connect the region. There's also things like e-bike incentives, which the state really did a wildly successful e-bike incentive the first round, and I believe they're re-upping that for another go around. So those are things that we can do to reduce the emissions in the transportation sector. In terms of buildings, the big one would be electrification, right? So moving away from fossil fuels and more towards heat pumps and things like that to heat and cool our homes. New England has by far, I think, the biggest usage of heating oil across the country. So that's something we can focus on, and that's something that actually the implementation funds will address, and I'll talk about that in a second. Waste and materials was another sector. So Connecticut's widely acknowledged to have a waste management crisis, and a lot of people don't necessarily know that, like, once you put something in a landfill, it emits methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and it causes global temperature increases. But it's also a transportation issue, because in Connecticut, we end up shipping a lot of our waste to Ohio and Pennsylvania, for example. So it's kind of a combination of a waste and transportation challenge. So again, we're talking about food waste diversion programs, basically just so we end up putting less stuff in landfills that ultimately end up emitting methane and other GHGs. The industrial sector is something that, admittedly, the regional climate action plans didn't cover a lot because there's not as much municipal purview over it. It's mostly a private sector thing, but we did mention it. There's things like we can do, like emissions monitoring, corporate recycling standards, and supporting more low embodied carbon materials. So it's touched upon certainly in the plan, if not an area of emphasis for municipalities per se. There's also agriculture and working lands, using open space and forests as a carbon sink. So Connecticut does phenomenally well with open space acquisition and preservation. So that was an emphasis in the plan, just to continue those efforts, because carbon sinks are a significant tool towards reducing emissions. And things like green infrastructure and urban forestry are significant tools towards that end. And just to quickly touch on the implementation funds, like I said, Connecticut was awarded funds. They were the lead applicants as part of a New England coalition, a 5-state coalition. EPA awarded in those states $450 million to boost heat pump acceleration and adoption. So that's very exciting. The funds were awarded in October. I believe the paperwork's been signed. They are just getting the program up and running currently, but that's a hugely exciting news for Connecticut and New England as a whole. We can accelerate the adoption of heat pumps across the region. And another implementation fund that was awarded was Connecticut was part of a coalition led by New Jersey this time for the Clean Corridor Coalition, which is focused on EV charging infrastructure along that I-95 corridor and adjacent roadways. So it's going to establish EV charging infrastructure for medium and heavy duty vehicles, technical assistance to charging sites, and also workforce support. So the elephant in the room, I think, for a lot of people in the climate action space over the past week or two was like, how does a change in presidential administration affect climate action work going forward at the federal level? And I thought this was interesting from the New Haven plan. They actually have a couple scenarios in the New Haven plan, and one of them was the coping with gridlock scenario. That was their second scenario, and you don't have to read the text to the right, but I would just highlight a few things. They projected, well, what if political gridlock worsens as climate change becomes sort of a wedge issue, federal funding dries up? What's kind of the potential outcome of a situation like that? And they're saying, well, likelihood the onus falls back on its cities and towns to take efforts on this, and local organizing has to become more engaged. So that's certainly not new to Connecticut or California, other states. They've done climate work well before the Inflation Reduction Act, and if things change in Washington, they probably will continue to do stuff at the state and federal level. So it just emphasizes the importance of kind of pushing that boulder up the hill no matter what happens in Washington. And then I'll conclude with this. So CPRG is funded through the Inflation Reduction Act, and there's also some considerable other incentives there for climate action work. And I certainly don't have any special connections to DC, or I don't have any inside information, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of facts that I thought were interesting about the Inflation Reduction Act. If you look at the projects by state, that left-hand column there, out of the top 20 or so recipients, most of them are Republican states, certainly by the number of investments in terms of dollar amounts and the number of projects. So in terms of the projects by sector, you're looking at EVs, battery storage, grid projects, hydrogen, semiconductors, solar, wind. So it spans multiple sectors. And if you look at who the recipients are by congressional district, the Republican congressional districts have 215 projects compared to Democratic is about 119 projects. So again, I certainly don't know what's happening in Congress, but I would hope that people would say behind the scenes, look, this is a beneficial program. It's certainly helping our constituents. It's creating jobs. It's creating investment. So I would hope that going forward they keep the bulk of this program intact. But again, we'll see what happens. So that's my presentation, and then I'll turn over to Christine. Christine, you want me to stop sharing and you'll take over?
Yep, that'd be great.
All right.
Could just a short thing, could we have these slides? This is something that I would like to let's say put on our sustainability team Facebook slide by slide. So could you send these slides to us?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can get them
Yeah,
to Kate.
we
Yeah.
can, we'll do our usual post coffee hour email, and we can include the slides from.
Yeah, because I think each one of them can be brought forth for people to understand this better.
Yeah, a lot of great information.
Okay, wonderful. Did anybody else have questions for Kyle or anything he discussed so far? Okay, well, then I will hop into my part. Hopefully, can I get a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Or okay,
all
awesome.
good.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. So my name is Christine. I'm an environmental planner with the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, which you may have seen is kind of split into several different planning areas, which has been a fun challenge. So I'm going to focus in a little bit more. Kyle gave a great overview of the entire program and some of the work we've done thus far. But the next part of this program is to work on these comprehensive climate action plans, or CCAPs. And what I'm hoping to do is make it relevant to all of you. I see some folks on here that I recognize from municipalities, and also it seems like some people are from potentially sustainability committees or commissions that may be associated with the municipality. So why should you care about this non-binding plan? Let's talk about it. So CCAP stands for Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. They're based on the regions that Kyle showed earlier. And like the priority climate action plan, it's this sort of aspirational document that I would call even less binding or legally applicable than your POCD. It's very broad. It has a lot of sort of wish list things. But unlike the PCAP, it really starts to drill down on a few different sections that give you a lot more technical and scientific information, planning information that can really help you apply some serious climate action. So, of course, the PCAPs are these important foundational documents. They already exist. And I'm just going to put a link in the chat. This is, like I said, because NVCOG is like in all of these different planning areas. If you go to our website and you click on the tabs, you'll be able to find a link to each of the different web pages for all the Connecticut plans. And so what we're doing is we're looking at these plans, we're taking those sort of measures or recommendations from the PCAP, and we're building on them. And here's some of the new stuff you could expect in the CCAP. So two of the really big things we're going to be doing is we'll take the greenhouse gas inventory that existed in the first one. And from that, we will extrapolate projections for the coming years. And we will set greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. Again, I just want to stress this is not binding. Nobody's committing to this. There's no penalty if the targets are not met. It's always better to have a goal than to just sort of, cross your fingers that things will get better. These are interesting things that I don't think will apply to the municipalities so specifically, but they will be part of the CCAP. These next few things I think will be much more applicable, and they are a workforce analysis. As we look into each of our measures, do we have the expertise and the education for folks to carry out the recommendations? A benefits analysis, including a special LIDAC, again, that's low income disadvantaged communities analysis. And then funding sources, which of course is the big one, right? Everybody wants to know how we can fund these things. Unlike the PCAP, the CCAP does not come with a round of implementation funding. So as we're gearing up for our CCAP, we want to do a lot more community engagement. It's really, really important to hear what you folks have to say, especially some of the frontline people who are experiencing the impacts of climate change and are fighting against it. So we held a collective climate action forum in October. Some of you may have even joined us there. Thank you if you were with us. We had about 90 participants, which was awesome. This took place in Middletown, and we had sort of split up into different workshop groups for the majority of the day in our 4 major sectors, which are transportation, waste, electrical grid, and building decarbonization. We had Katie Dykes there as a speaker, and we had a speaker from the Connecticut Green Bank. It was a really productive day, and we've just finished compiling something like 40 pages of notes. So we're very excited to get that out to you. But this is the sort of thing you can look forward to, big events like this, but also some smaller, more targeted tabling and pop-up events that we're working on to engage people for the CCAP. And of course, as we get further along, because these plans aren't due until December of 2025, so a year from now, we would certainly have drafts to publish for people to comment on. But you're in municipalities, you're already drowning in work. Who gives a cap? Why should you care about climate action planning? What can this do for you? So I have a few ideas of how this can be applicable, and let's start with your local planning efforts. So you have a lot of data and information in these CCAPs. I'm going to give a couple of examples. So for instance, the Southwest Connecticut, this is just the priority climate action plan, but again, we'll extrapolate upon it for the CCAP. They conducted a community survey and found that respondents prioritized public health over reduced utility costs. So that's interesting. That data could help inform decisions or policies that go into your plan of conservation and development for your town. As you're creating priorities for your capital investment plan or CIP, basically, how is the town going to budget its money for the coming years and what will it invest in? And legislative priorities. if we know this about your population and you're supposed to represent what the population wants, that's an interesting thing to know and to help you make decisions. The New Haven plan has this a great regional map, and it identifies for each census tract the percentage of housing that was built before 1960. This could be a really useful map for you to sort of transpose into your affordable housing plan, which of course every municipality is required to maintain. So, and also we've got some cool graphics and charts here. So from the Hartford region, the CROG plan, they have a really great demographic chart that shows population, age distribution, race, median household income for the state of Connecticut, then for the region. And then if you're, say, I don't know, Bloomfield or something, and you want to use this in your own POCD, you can just find these same stats for your town, and now you have contextualized it in the region and the state. So really interesting stuff. This is also another a map from Southwest Connecticut, and we can see this is heat vulnerability scores. I'm sorry, I blew up the picture and it's kind of hard to read, but this is great for facilities or emergency services planning. Where do you want to put a cooling center? Who's most vulnerable to heat as climate change gets worse? So use what's in the PCAP. Don't duplicate your work, or PCAP and CCAP. Don't duplicate your work, because you've got some really good, interesting demographics, data, surveys that have already been done. The next thing is grant writing. So we have some excellent tools for grant writing here. The identification of funding sources is going to be phenomenal. Having that matrix of different sources. Again, we all sort of have our fingers crossed that with the new administration, things won't change too much. But for instance, the state funding sources hopefully will remain more or less intact. There's also some narrative portions of the CCAP that you can use and just sort of lift into your grant applications. And so I'll give you an example. Don't feel like you have to read all this, but this is from the state's PCAP. They have this paragraph about heavy rainfall events and how it impacts Connecticut. If you're writing a grant about your town's, upgrading your town's flood response system, or trying to do some low impact development to reduce, for flood attenuation, you have a great paragraph here that demonstrates need, that shows that Connecticut is really, really vulnerable to floods, particularly low income disadvantaged communities. We have some stats and some references to different studies here about the sort of ways people are impacted. And there's even an associated map that can go with it. So that's great. Put that into your grant, because the work is already done here. And then finally, we're here at our wonderful Sustainable CT coffee hour. And Sustainable CT, of course, has this great menu of options that you can earn points for. And there's a lot of overlap with the climate action plans. So use these caps as roadmaps to earn your designation. So I'll give an example. Here are a couple of, or 3 sustainable CT actions that I pulled out. One says promote public transit and other mobility strategies. And we have an associated PCAP measure, again, to be expanded in the CCAP, about creating a transit first approach. So that lines up nicely. 7.4 is to increase use of renewable energy in municipal buildings. And from I think this one was Southwest CT, install solar panels and add storage and microgrids on municipal properties. And then report materials management data to reduce waste. And here we have this waste reduction to enhance existing waste programs. So a lot of these measures line up really nicely. And what I wanted to kind of demonstrate is that the CCAP is not just going to align with these things, it's going to give you more context. So you're going to have a benefits analysis that looks at specifically why you should do this, how it directly impacts people. There might even be a specific LIDAC benefit strategy. This is an implementation schedule, right? So that's nice if you're trying to, pass an ordinance or something and you want to go to your legislative body. It's great to have these details and some possible funding sources. So you're going to get a lot more information that can take it from an action or a concept or just a bullet in a plan to something that's really actionable for you. And so just, to briefly mention at the COGS, what we want to do is help the municipalities, support them. We want them to save money and time and effort, and we usually do that through economies of scale. And so we want the CCAP to be useful to you. The way we do that is by hearing from you. So please stay engaged. Look at that link I put in the chat and find your plan and talk to your project managers for these plans. Stay engaged, stay involved. We want to make sure that these plans don't just sit on a shelf and actually can assist you and reflect what you need. So thank you very, very much for listening. Here's the information. These are the folks you can reach out to who are working on the plans. And I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Christine and Kyle. That was a really informative and great presentation. Kudos to you and all the COGS for this must have been a big undertaking, and it looks like a really amazing product so far. Yeah, lots of great information. So thank you for all the hard work you've done. So yeah, open it up to questions. Feel free to come off mute or type in the chat if you can't.
I have a question because and this is again, this is Amalia, and we're the COG right now, or a lot of the sustainability teams in River COG are looking towards solutions for heat pumps and energy assessments and all that. East Haddam's already working with Energize CT on doing that, but other COGs are working with Heat Smart, and we'd like our COG to maybe help us fund PACE, which is the group that is working to help gather more people, sending out the information. And so we're talking with them, and they suggested that maybe the COG could finance that, that sending out of all that information and expect to all the regional, to the whole region. How would we go about doing that? What are the steps in the process engaging with you guys?
So you're in the River Cog region?
Yeah, we're East Haddam.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for River Cog, but I would suggest reaching out to Megan Juflis or Sam Gold at River Cog in terms of what they can do. Certainly, they can be a conduit for information sharing, coordinating, bringing the towns together. And I would also say, given that the state has this $450 million implementation for heat pump adoption, I think the program is still being stood up, so the details are not even worked out yet. So I would certainly stay tuned for news from deep in the state on their heat pump adoption program. But I would say the initial step, reach out to Sam and Megan at River Cog for how they can specifically assist you.
Okay, because I have someone else at River Cog, that Janine, I think is their name, or
Yeah, I think just touch base with the staff, and because I don't want to speak for their capacity or what they can specifically do, but they could probably guide you from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And just a note on funding. So COGS are largely funded by grants. We get, disbursements from the state and from the federal government, but most of what we do operates on grants. And this CPRG program, we did apply for implementation funding, like Kyle mentioned, with the PCAP for that first round, but there's no implementation funding associated with the CCAPs, unfortunately. We'll have to go out to existing grant programs, but I wish we had money to implement these plans. I think it's sort of an oversight of the way that the EPA kind of rolled this out, but unfortunately, we don't have grants to implement the plans.
Okay, so we're basically, you can help us in understanding but we're on our own to figure out where the money is going to come from.
I wouldn't necessarily, like Kyle said, check with River Cog. We don't know what sort of sources, but specifically for CPRG funding, I'm just saying that there isn't a pot of money there. There might be other funds that they can tap into.
Okay, thank you.
And it sounds like RiverCog can also help you better understand when that state funding for the new heat pump program is when that's all the details are fleshed out, they can probably help you navigate that.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah.
Any other questions? I have one if no one else is has anything to ask right now. So NVCOG was involved in all 3 regional plans in Connecticut. I'd love to know how the different COGs communicated in developing their own regional plans. Connecticut's not a huge state, even though each region has differing needs or differing priorities. I would imagine you also wanted to have overlap and shared goals. So I'd love if you could talk about that and how you worked together across the different regions on your individual plans.
Christine, you're the perfect person to answer that since you're like spread across all 3 MSAs.
Yeah, if I could just share my screen again. So this is the NVCOG region, and the different colors represent different planning areas that our towns were kind of pulled into. So as you can see, we had Shelton in the southwest. We had the majority of our towns, including our largest community of Waterbury, was with New Haven. The gray ones are in the state plan, which captures those gray areas that weren't tied up in a COGS plan, and then Bristol was up with Hartford. So yeah, I would first of all say that Kyle is being modest. He is pretty much the glue that has held these cogs together. He has really taken a lead on organizing meetings for us. The cogs that have been involved with this have had at minimum monthly meetings, and when we're planning something more collaborative, as much as every week or every other week we've met. And we've had even our consultants talk to each other. These coordination meetings have been really useful. We've shared contract language and RFP language to make sure it's as efficient as possible. But yeah, I think Kyle has really been the main force who's organized these meetings and kept us coming together and talking to each other. We also have a pretty active little Teams group chat that we're all constantly talking to each other about stuff going on with this. So it's actually been really, really fun and rewarding. I'm so glad I'm on this project because I don't think I would know my like fellows at these different cogs otherwise. I call them my cog leagues, and I love them, and it's been so fun working with them and getting to know them. So this has been a great experience.
Yeah, I would agree. And like to your point, Kate, we are a small state, and like yes, there are differences between the regions, but like they're not like dramatic differences. And even if you look at like plans from across the country, they all say like sort of the same thing. Like, yes, we need to electrify transportation and phase out the internal combustion engine over time. We need to kind of phase out fossil fuels to heat and cool our homes and towards heat pumps and electrify that. We need to, reduce our waste stream. So like they all say essentially the same things, and the details and implementation and the nitty-gritty parts of that, but like the overall themes are very consistent, even internationally, I'm sure. So it's the detail is the sticking point, I think.
I have a question. Um, if for municipalities that are outside of the MSA areas, so seems like primarily the northwest corner, southeast corner, I think Christine, you mentioned like the state plans cover them. Yeah, and Kyle, you just mentioned a lot of these plans are applicable nationwide, maybe even internationally wide. So yeah, for towns that aren't necessarily a part of one of these regional plans, what's a good way for them, yeah, to engage, I guess, in this work? Or can they just look at when the CCAP comes out and look at relevant funding sources for them? What's the sort of like applicability as well to those towns?
Yeah, I think even if you're not, so by default, if you're in one of those areas that you said, the gray areas, you're by default in the state, so you can certainly consult the state plan. But even like even COGs that are not technically formally in our planning area have been involved with us. So like staff from Northwest Hills COG have been working with us. Occasionally, Southeast Council governments have been involved in some meetings and some functions. So yes, you can look at really any CCAP for example, I'm looking at prior to come action plans from Atlanta, Boston, Philly, Arizona. So like you can pull the ideas from anywhere. So I mean, just borrow far and wide is what I would suggest.
Great, thanks.
I have another question if there's no one else from the group that has one. Kyle, you mentioned that a lot of the plans are really similar and generally things like electrification and these priorities come up over and over because we know they're the strategies that work. Christine, in your presentation, you mentioned a community survey where people prioritized public health more highly than utility cost savings. I'd love to know if like you found any other surprises like that in the stakeholder engagement process, in talking to municipal leaders. Yeah, just because that's definitely something that I wouldn't have expected to come out of a conversation like that.
I don't know if it surprised me. Maybe Christine, you know this better, but even though like waste management technically isn't like percentage wise, it's not a huge portion of emissions. Like it came up at every single meeting. Like waste management came up at every single meeting. So it's like it's certainly top of mind for local leaders, I think. Would you agree, Christine?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. The thing is, Connecticut is right now shipping 42% of its waste to landfills out of state. And the way that the CPRG program sort of asks you to calculate these emissions is we don't really look out of state. We just look at sort of where the waste ends up, not or maybe I guess you could say some of the emissions associated with our waste end up in the transportation sector because we're shipping our waste. But so although it looks like a relatively small number, it is a big thing. And yeah, I would definitely say that's one of the things that surprised me. Something else that I've been trying to think about a lot throughout this process is like, what's the municipal appetite for some of these measures? And I ended up doing a survey of my 19-town region, and I found not a single town in the 19 towns of NVCOG has any electrical vehicles in their fleet. And so to have an action that says electrify your municipal fleets, it's interesting, but I guess I thought this is something that most, municipalities wanted or had started. That's not to say they don't want to do it, but not even a single one is, I don't know, it makes me think about how actionable some of these are and how important it is to ground truth it. Mary says that okay, we love this. Oh my gosh, Bristol has a Chevy Bolt. Well, when I called Bristol, they told me they had 0. So I love this. Okay, so we have one electric vehicle in the NVCOG region, and it is in Bristol. It's a Chevy Bolt. I love to hear it. So it's great. It's great to hear that some folks are interested in this and doing it, but I still think we have an extremely long way to go.
I have another, I'm doing the practical stuff because, that's where in a way, that's where we need to be met. And could we have your survey so that we could use it? One of the things is to create good surveys that we can then either give to the town or give to our residents. And so I'd like a copy of the survey that you
the one I referenced about the public health and
that asked what were priorities or whatever surveys you did, that would be helpful.
So that's in the Southwest Climate Action Plan. Actually, any survey we referenced or all of that is in the priority climate action plans that we linked that I linked earlier on the NVCOG page. I just put it in the chat right now.
That's helpful because one of the things is to understand that we're all volunteers here, and so that digging in a lot of paperwork is we just don't have the capacity to do that. So one of the reasons we come to these coffee hours is to get that information in a way that is directly applicable to us. So thank you for this.
Absolutely. And I'm putting the page number in the chat right now.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments, or? I think we have a good mix in here today of municipal staff and then also folks who are maybe more sustainability team volunteers. If there's no other specific questions, Christine and Kyle, maybe you could talk a little about how both municipal staff and volunteers or just really engaged residents can continue to stay engaged and be up to date on what's happening as the CCAP process continues.
Okay, I think the contact information that Christine showed in their final slide, we can certainly engage with you by request with your commissions. We're from Hartford, we're going to do a new survey. So if you want to answer a survey, or if you can simply just want to email me, and I'll be happy to pick up the phone and just have a conversation with you or talk to your commission if you want. So that'd be the simplest way to do, is just contact the staff in your respective COG and just reach out to them. And I think every COG would probably have a slightly different engagement approach going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just note that for the New Haven plan, the Impact 2045, we have a mailing list. So it's cprgct.org, which I'll put in the chat right now. If you go there and scroll to the bottom, we have an email list that we'll reach out if we have any major upcoming stuff going on. And at our NVCOG website, which I know is not super useful because it shows stuff for multiple different plans, any engagement activity NVCOG is involved with, we post it there ahead of time and have like dates and flyers and have a big list of all the engagement stuff we've done. So feel free to check out our webpage.
Great, thank you both. And then, of course, Sustainable CT can promote any specific engagement opportunities that the COGs have coming up. And hopefully you already get our information since you're in this coffee hour. I guess any last questions? And if not, we can give everyone a bonus 11 minutes back.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
well, Kyle, Christine, thank you both so much. Yeah, great conversation, great information.
Yeah, thank you, Kate and Sustainable CT team. And folks, if you have questions going forward, just reach out to us individually. Happy to chat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.